You see Trump doing things that we didn't believe were necessarily within the president's power or that would be blocked by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court keeps allowing these things.
We can say hello and welcome to David Graham, who's a staff writer at The Atlantic and also the author of The Project. Our Project 2025 is reshaping America and the world. David, welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. So, look, there's a few things it'd be good to chat about. I'm going to start with maybe the most current thing, although there's always, many balls in the air at the same time when it comes to American politics and the Trump presidency. And we heard on the question of Ukraine at the weekend, President Trump asked about his next steps on Russia.
Are you ready to move to the second phase of sanctions against Russia or punishing...
Was he ready to move? Yes, was the answer. And we've now seen Russia launch its most ferocious drone and missile attack on Ukraine so far in this war. It breaks that record pretty much every day that passes. But big question now, I suppose, and maybe you can help us with this one, David, is President Trump about to act?
It's hard to know. He hasn't offered us a great deal of details. I think there are two things that are worth noting. One is Trump has consistently in these cases sort of said he'll have an answer in 2 weeks, he'll have an answer in 10 days, in 12 days. And he didn't give anything like that. So maybe that suggests a little bit more urgency, even without the detail. I also think we can see that he's become increasingly frustrated with Putin. Every time there is a strike like this, I think he understands that it makes his peace process look less likely, and it makes him look a little bit bad as somebody who hasn't been able to sort of marshal Putin. And so you can see his patience getting shorter with the Kremlin.
Yes, I mean, it seems to have been getting shorter and shorter, but without, the fuse actually leading to the ultimate explosion. Now, maybe it's going to happen this time, but one can be forgiven for being pretty sceptical about that. And we're hearing, aren't we, David, from the Trump team, what they want is for Europe to step up and do a bit more themselves. And David, in one sense, there's a point to be made there, isn't there? Because the countries of the European Union are still significant buyers, David, of Russian liquid gas, one of the major buyers. David Wood.
That's right.
David Wood.
Sorry.
Stay with us, though. I want to get David's thought on that question. The European countries still buy an awful lot of liquid gas from Russia.
Too many Davids in here. I mean, that is part of the problem. I mean, mostly it's India and China who take the gas and oil. But again, some European countries have been relying on it. And that's one of the things that we were warned about long before this invasion, was that we need to cut our dependency on gas from that part of the world. And it's one of those where the chickens have come home to roost on it. Yeah,
I mean, there is a timetable to end dependency of the kind that we see in Europe at the moment by 2027, but that's still a couple of years down the track. And in that sense, as I say, maybe the Americans have got a point, although they're still, Joe, the big players here. And the biggest other player, other than India, which has been on the wrong end of American sanctions, is China. And Donald Trump is not keen to go there.
But he's not very happy. He's not very happy with anyone, is he? After that little get together that they all had, he's been pretty cross, and he made it very clear that he was going to do something. He talked about, if Russia did not move, that he was going to do something and was going to have to up the ante. It feels like his phase 2 is going to be slightly different than Keir Starmer's phase 2 in terms of its scale and scope. So it certainly looks as if we are approaching the time that is going to have to happen.
And David Graham, I mean, do you believe it when you hear the president talking yet again about getting tough with Russia, and then we hear, look, Europe has to do more? Is this just another way of saying, look, I'm not going to do very much for the foreseeable future? What's your sense? What does your gut tell you?
I mean, I think that's a lot of it. I also think there's a certain amount of kind of improvisation and just working in the moment. And he seizes on something that he can talk about as a sort of distraction. It might be Putin's fault. It might be Europe's fault. It's something to turn the attention away from the process itself and to sort of find a new scapegoat. I'm surprised we haven't seen more sort of firm action against China in general on trade issues. And this is a great example. He doesn't seem, despite tough rhetoric, willing to really necessarily act there. And I'm not sure we see a whole lot of action on Ukraine either.
David, let's talk about the troops on the streets in American cities now, because there does seem to be this sense that the president is very close to authorizing National Guard troops into the streets of Chicago, just as he has already in Washington, D.C., just as he did in Los Angeles, just as he's pretty much expected to in other cities too. Now, look, have a listen to this. I spoke earlier on to Charles Kupcher, who was a senior director for National Security Council that was under President Obama. And he had a pretty bleak forecast. He suggested that US democracy might not survive after the end of Donald Trump's presidency. And I asked him what he meant by that.
Well, we just see on an almost daily basis norms and practices of liberal democracy being threatened. And I have to say, as an American, especially an American who lives in Washington, just kind of watching on a daily basis the multiple sectors of civil society bending the knee under presidential pressure, whether it is the media, whether it is the law firms, the universities, the courts. There's a playbook out there. We've seen this happen before in Hungary, in Poland under the previous government, in Turkey. We know how this works, and it's happening here in the United States, and it's downright scary.
It's Charles Kupchan there talking to me a bit earlier on. I mean, David Graham, live on the line from the USA. Would you echo that sort of sentiment, David, or is that going too far? Is democracy itself under threat in your view in your country?
It's hard to say, and it feels hyperbolic until you take it apart and start looking at the pieces. And it does feel as though there are checks and balances being removed all the time. You see Trump doing things that we didn't believe were necessarily within the president's power or that would be blocked by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court keeps allowing these things. It's not clear what authority Trump would use, for example, to send troops to Chicago. It's not legally the same as sending troops to Washington, D.C., but he does seem determined to do it over the objection of local authorities. And so you get this situation where you're sending in troops in a somewhat hostile way to, cities and states that are governed by your political opponents. And it gets to be very tense and very worrisome. Especially if it doesn't seem like there is a force, whether that's the courts or the Congress, that can or will restrain him if he were to go too far.
Okay, I just want to get David and Joe's take on this in just a second, but just let me bring you a bit of breaking news. It's from Heathrow Airport, Terminal 4, who have just posted this on their social media account. It says Terminal 4 check-in has been closed and evacuated while emergency services respond to an incident. Please do not travel to Terminal 4. Colleagues are supporting passengers on site. We will provide further information as soon as we can. Other terminals are operating as normal. That is the entirety of the statement from Heathrow. We'll have you more on that, an explanation of what is going on there at the country's, one of Europe's busiest airports, as soon as we get it, I promise you. Now, David and Joe, what are you making of this? The troops into Chicago, it's almost as if this stuff's becoming normal, but of course it isn't.
No, the nearest we've ever had to this, I'm trying to think of something where a prime minister has taken on the leader of another case was the militant business in Liverpool with Derek Hatton years ago when the city was in danger of going bankrupt in the early 80s. This is several steps higher than that. I mean, J.B. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, has accused Donald Trump of going to war with an American city. But I'd like to ask David what he thinks is the driving force behind the president on this one. We know that he gets things done in his own unique way, and he doesn't mess around when he wants something done. If he wants to stop migrants, he builds a wall or whatever it is he's taking on. He does it in a very forthright and an extreme way in many cases. But is he doing this because of a problem in Chicago, or is he really doing it to take down his political enemies?
I think it may be a bit of both. I mean, there's no question that crime in Chicago is bad, although dropping well beyond where it was a couple of years ago. And that kind of gets to the question of, okay, what is it now that is necessitating these sorts of deployments? And what is the goal? Surely the goal isn't zero crime in a major city. So, where are they aiming? I think Trump is looking for ways to change the subject away from things that are not going well all the time. Mm-hmm. He believes, generally correctly based on polling, that immigration and public, law and order are two of his strongest areas. And I think throughout his time in office, he's seen the military as this huge resource that's sitting there untapped and under his control, and he'd like to be able to use it for more things. And so, deploying troops in this way at this moment seems to fill a lot of buckets for him.
Susanna.
I was just it's interesting what you just said then, David, because I was thinking, what exactly with these things you'd normally expect like a threshold. You'd expect a sort of a set of metrics that would then be this now tips it so that I have to do something. But yet there's been a lot of argument about what the stats really show with regards to crime numbers and which type of crime is it that then justifies an intervention of some point. And there's a sort of dangerous precedent being set, I guess. I don't know if you'd agree that there isn't a proper metric and therefore it's just at the whim of the president, which is pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I think it's also a question of what they're there to do. We've seen police chiefs and mayors and governors saying that are valuable roles for the National Guard, but it isn't necessarily rolling in armored vehicles down the streets. It's helping out with some specific tasks, helping out with surveillance, helping out with you name it. And that doesn't seem to be the help that they're getting to deal with crime.
Yeah, I mean, David Graham, I look at the opinion polls. I mean, as with so many of these issues, no matter how different they may be one to another, they have something in common, which is that the American public split. They take polar opposite positions. Now, most Republican voters, most Trump voters support the idea of troops on the streets. Most Democrats, maybe a larger majority, oppose the idea. Most Americans overall seem to be not in favour of this sort of action. But of course, I suppose from Trump's point of view, it seems to be working for him. It's a narrative that he thinks he can keep on pushing with conviction. His own people like it. And maybe there is that distraction factor to it as well. I mean, there's plenty to be distracted from, if you like. I mean, for example, David, the economics numbers of late have not been especially promising for the Trump administration, even though the president quite recently sacked an economic statistician who was putting out numbers that he didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, the jobs numbers on Friday were the worst we have seen in some time. Retroactive revisions to post, earlier ones showed that we lost jobs earlier this summer. And, this is as Trump really, his economic policies are finally taking hold. The things he's wanted are happening. His tariffs are in place, and the results are not good. And of course, I think that's particularly dangerous for him because Republicans tend to have the edge on the economy over Democrats. And because he knows that he won the election in 2024, in large part because voters were extremely dissatisfied with the way Joe Biden was running the economy.
Where's this going to head? I mean, the president is sticking to his tariff policy, although we are seeing the beginnings of prices heading north, of prices going up. The American firms stocked up on a lot of import goods when the tariffs first came in, so they didn't have to put prices up on those goods. But now those stocks are running low, and they're having to put up prices accordingly. And people, they can feel it, they can see it with their own eyes. And we're talking about Republican voters as well as Democrats. It's the same thing, David Graham.
That's right. Exactly. It is inflation going up, and it's these policies. And Trump has bragged about the policies, so there's no question that he sort of owns them and will have to answer for them. I think the one question that I still have is where this will go in courts. We saw tariffs shot down by a federal appeals court very recently. Trump has appealed that, and he's tended to have success on appeal. But we don't know what might happen, or if they're struck down, what other avenues he might try to take. Yeah. It doesn't seem like Republicans in Congress are excited to try to pass tariffs, so that doesn't seem like a good avenue for him.
I wonder what the way through this would be for President Trump if the Supreme Court agrees with that federal appeals court and says, no, it is not your job to put up tariffs in that way. That's the job of Congress. I mean, so far, the president has used the reason of a national emergency. That does allow the president to step in with measures of this kind. But the federal appeals court was very clear that the test for that intervention was simply not being met. It would take the Supreme Court to do a big about turn on the appeals court to strike that one down.
That's right. And I mean, I think one thing we've seen from the Trump administration is they're very clever about finding new things, new avenues to test things. So if they're shot down on one attempt, they'll try to find another authority. And, they're sort of eating up clock, as it were. They only have so much time, and they want to use as much of that to get these things in and put it into the judicial process, which moves slowly. So I'm guessing they have backups ready, other laws they think they can use, even if they are challenged.
Right. I mean, and look, and we've got a few minutes left, so I want to get your thoughts on, of course, the other story, which keeps on making the top of the bulletins, the front page of the American newspapers as well, and that is the Epstein scandal, because there is still this movement which crosses party lines in a curious way to get more of those Epstein papers published. Donald Trump wants to move on. He says it's a hoax, a Democrat hoax. But you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the more partisan Congress members you could possibly wish or hope to meet in Washington. And she's pressing the president to release more information about this.
In Jeffrey Epstein's home and the places they went with him, they saw the most powerful people in the world in his pictures, and they saw him with those people. Can you imagine how terrifying it would be to name names like that? These are some of the richest, most powerful people in the world that could sue these women into poverty and homelessness. Yeah, it's a scary thing to name names, but I will tell you, I'm not afraid to name names. And so if they want to give me a list, I will walk in that Capitol on the House floor and I'll say every damn name that abused these women. I can do that for them.
So, I mean, David Graham, to hear Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the most forthright, bare-knuckled scrappers on the Trump side, talking in this way, saying exactly what Trump does not want to hear, that's a worry for the White House, isn't it?
It is. This is one. I mean, we have seen many issues where people predicted a break between Trump and parts of his base. And it hasn't really panned out in most of those cases. But this is one place where you do see a real division within Trump supporters, and people feel very strongly about it. And as we've seen, when Republicans and Democrats both have been meeting with some of Epstein's victims, it's a very sympathetic group of victims. It's people who are, young girls who are abused. Nobody disagrees that this abuse happened. And it's understandable that they want accountability and they want to know what happened, especially since we've had so many prominent members of the Trump administration, including the Attorney General and the head of the FBI, sort of talking about how important the story was and how important it was to follow up on it. Now they're on the other side of that, and it certainly doesn't look good for them.
Why is someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene so hot on this case?
I think for Greene, she's sort of sincere about it. There is this view within a lot of the MAGA movement that there is deeply entrenched pedophilia throughout the corridors of power, and many of them, ran on that. They were interested in things like the QAnon conspiracy theory, and this connects to that, and it's a deeply held belief for them. And so it's sort of connecting right to what she has been saying for years, and she wants to get to the bottom of it. I think in a relatively sincere way.
Yeah, unleash your conspiracy theory like that, and it is very hard to rein in if that's what you want to do, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to say, David, where will it end? I mean, there surely isn't going to be a big publication. I mean, there's even been a suggestion that there isn't a list of names in the way that has been sort of called for. So where does this end? Because it's this sort of very difficult position for Trump in particular to sort of supposedly sort of defend himself from being involved, but then also the suggestion, this is just a nightmare because it's a lot of names that are bandied around, but people can't necessarily defend themselves very effectively. But I don't really know if there is a growing sense that something will be published in the States, whether that will be the sort of line that will finally be crossed.
It seems likely we're going to get something, but it's hard to know what, because, there are names of victims. There are names of people who are not accused of crime or who there's not evidence to accuse of a crime in there. And it can't sort of be released wholesale. The Trump administration has tried repeatedly to find sort of giving enough information that people will feel satisfied, attempting to release grand jury transcripts, for example. And none of those has worked. Every time they've released more information, it seems to whet the appetite more. And I'm a bit mystified as to where it ends. And I'm, even with sympathetic victims, even with all of these things, I'm surprised that the story has managed to linger so long. In an American political media environment where no story seems to last more than about 15 minutes, this one keeps rolling on.
It certainly does. David Graham at The Atlantic, thank you so much for joining us. Joe and David, thank you so much for coming in. Always a pleasure. And thank you for listening.